this cholera scandal is entirely man-made.
War and disease, the twin pillars of Yemen's misery. It was already one of the world's poorest countries before a brutal civil war broke out 2 years ago. And now the nation of 25 million seems poised to hit rock bottom on virtually every indicator of well-being. A deadly cholera epidemic is sweeping the land, and even getting information about what's happening within Yemen's borders is getting harder and harder. Journalists are finding it all but impossible to get inside. So, how did things get so bad? Well, like other countries in the region, Yemen's disaster has roots in the Arab Spring of 2011. When people rose up against their authoritarian government. The thing is, democracy did not flourish. Instead, regional and religious tensions exploded into civil war. On the one hand, the government of Abdurrahman Mansour Hadi, propped up by a Saudi-led Arab coalition. On the other, the rebel Houthi movement, a Shia religious political faction supported by Iran.
We will not stop until the last beat of our hearts, until the last drop of our blood. Women, men, and children will fight.
Fighting has been fierce. The Saudis unleash devastating airstrikes, while the Houthis rely more on ruthless guerrilla tactics. At least 3 million people have been displaced. At least 10,000 people have been killed, more than 40,000 injured. And add into this swirling cauldron a raging cholera epidemic that broke out in April. It's being called the worst of its kind since modern records began almost 70 years ago. And to give you a sense of just how bad the epidemic is, well over 300,000 cases of cholera were reported in Haiti in the year following the 2010 earthquake. Yemen has recorded the same number of cases in just 3 months, and the country's rainy season is just beginning. Now, Scott Paul is someone who's seen the situation in Yemen firsthand. He's a senior humanitarian policy advisor with Oxfam, and we had a chance to chat earlier this evening. So, Scott, you were in Yemen as recently as last year. What did you see?
I take 2 really strong images away from my time in Yemen. The first was during my trip to a small town called Khamar. I talked with a lot of people who used to work at a factory that had been destroyed by the Saudi-led coalition in airstrikes. And every time the factory tried to reopen, the Saudi-led coalition would threaten another set of airstrikes, and so they couldn't go back to work. So they were left cleaning up the neighborhood, essentially. They had no salaries, there's trash in the streets, public systems are collapsing all around, and people are just asking, why is this happening to us? The other image is one of incredible generosity. I saw communities where when we distributed assistance or when someone was able to buy a bag of rice, that rice was shared with the entire community. When people had to flee one neighborhood to another or one community to another and go to school in a new place, the community that was there opened their hearts and said, well, we'll just have 2 sessions. I saw so many people working without salaries just to save each other. It's an incredible spirit of solidarity.
And so, you know, when we look specifically at the cholera epidemic, can you tell us why has it spiraled out of control so quickly?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different contributing causes, but the 2 I'll highlight is, one, there's a de facto blockade being imposed right now by the Saudi-led coalition, and it's hard for food to come in, it's very hard for commercial imports or aid to get in, but it's especially hard also for fuel to get in. And people need fuel in order to pump water, treat and clean water, and clean the streets. And so what you have is you have lots of waste in the streets, and it's contaminating water sources. The other side of this is that all of the parties to conflict are weaponizing the economy, and they're essentially putting a siege on the economy. And what that's doing is it's collapsing public systems. Government employees haven't been paid in nearly a year, and so health infrastructure and sanitation infrastructure are collapsing all over the country.
And so if things are as bad as you say they are, why hasn't the international community been able to step up?
Essentially, you know, the thing that I heard that most stayed with me is Yemen is Syria without the cameras. And the reason the cameras aren't there is because the Saudi-led coalition is blocking journalists from entering the country. I just heard about a UN flight carrying aid workers last week that was prohibited from entering Yemen because it was carrying 3 journalists on it.
So what would it take, Scott, to change the situation there?
You know, I'm actually optimistic in light of all this and in the face of all this, because if the parties agree to a political settlement, they will have the opportunity to revive Yemen's economy, to get its government institutions working again, to pay government workers, to allow imports to come into the country, and a lot of the misery and suffering and unnecessary deaths that are taking place now can be put to an end. Right now, the conflict has more or less stalled. The parties are not gaining a huge amount of ground. They're really trying to inch along and get a little bit more advantage before they make peace. But what's unfortunately happening is the international community is enabling them to keep fighting. They're not prioritizing peace. And if we can get to a political settlement, we'll avoid a lot of unnecessary deaths.
Okay, Scott Paul with Oxfam, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Andrew.